You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Brian Platzer.
Authors. I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website. Developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. The Feisty Heroine romance collection of short stories. Over 30 plus pulse racing shorts to capture your heart with USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and award-winning authors in the mix. Paranormal, contemporary, fantasy, and historical romance that will whet your appetite with titillating, heart-pounding tales you'll want to read again, then beg for more. Fall in love with your next book crush. Pre-order this amazing collection of shorts, over 30 pulse-pounding stories for only 99 cents.
Proceed with caution. Buying this collection may lead to addictive reading, falling in love with your next book crush, and staying up past your bedtime to see what happens next.
Get your limited edition copy of Feisty Heroines. Look for the link in the show notes of this episode. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have CJ Box back on the show to talk about his 20th Joe Pickett novel called Long Range. CJ, this cannot be 20 books in the Joe Pickett series. Man, where has time gone?
I know. I agree completely. I never thought there'd be a book 2 in the Joe Pickett series. So yeah, to think that 20 books in, it's pretty amazing. That's kind of humbling. Well, and for those that are not familiar with Joe Pickett, God forbid, he's kind of one of the unlikeliest, at least on the surface, kind of thriller protagonist that you could come up with. Refresh people's memories. Where did Joe Pickett come from? Sure. And I agree with you. Joe Pickett is a Wyoming game warden, meaning he's in charge of enforcing game and fish regulations in the state of Wyoming. The game wardens in Wyoming in real life, there's only 50 of them. They have massive districts that they patrol up to 5,000 square miles. They tend to be very heavily armed and drive around in their pickups and often with their dogs. And in addition to, ticketing a fisherman for fishing without a license, they also get involved in other aspects of law enforcement because they're often called on by local law enforcement or state law enforcement to participate in other activities like, kidnappings or hostage situations or murder investigations.
And Joe Pickett does all of that. So in addition to his daily, day-to-day job, never knows when he'll be called away to participate in a task force or something else. And because game wardens are often so remote and isolated, rarely are they able to call in backup if they need it. So they have to learn how to handle situations on their own and adapt to whatever's out there. And almost everyone they encounter in the day is armed, because they're hunters and fishermen and campers and trekkers. So it opens up a lot of territory and a lot of subject matter from a different point of view.
Well, and in a place like Wyoming where there's so much wilderness, having law enforcement that is so familiar with the surrounding and the wilderness and the kind of the lay of the land is kind of a crucial piece to law enforcement, isn't it?
It is, and not only in Wyoming. I think if you recall, a few years ago there was a cop killer in California. And there's a statewide dragnet going out for him. And he was eventually located by local game wardens who realized that somebody was occupying a cabin who shouldn't have been there. So they were brought in that instance. And that sort of thing happens quite a bit.
I love that. And when we said that Joe Pickett is kind of the most unlikely thriller protagonist, we meant that with much love, because we understand how important these people are, but they don't seem to get the due that they deserve, and I'm glad that Joe Pickett has brought that to the fore.
Well, thank you. I think the game wardens around here certainly kind of like that too. But game wardens are different in state by state. In a lot of states, they're more like conservation officers who don't have the same kind of authorities and responsibilities. So I think it's kind of unique to the West and the Southwest that game wardens are sort of prominent in the law enforcement community. The other thing I think that makes makes the Joe different than a lot of protagonists in these books is that he's a very dedicated family man, raised 3 daughters, dotes on his wife. She's much smarter than he is. And so he's not a lone wolf PI out on the prowl. He's very much, state employee, returns every night to his house, and his wife is very important, not only in his life, but also in his investigations, because she's a part of it.
Right. Before we jump into what this new book, Long Range, is really about, you've got some new news that I just saw yesterday or today that I thought was pretty exciting. The last time you were on the show, we were talking about the latest Cassie Duell book, and she is coming to the screen, isn't she?
That's right. David E. Kelley, who's a very, very well-known and prominent, TV producer, bought the books many years ago and wanted to adapt them for a television series. And he's starting with the book The Highway, which is by far my creepiest novel. And he's adapting that, and it's going to be a series called The Big Sky to take place in Montana. And it's going to be on ABC this fall. So they're in the process right now of every day I see a new actor has been hired, and it's going to be pretty exciting when it happens. And it's, after all these years, it's happening quite quickly. It was what they call a straight to series order.
Oh, that's amazing. I cannot wait. That is, we're in the golden age of TV right now, where that seems to be, if you want to do visual storytelling, I think I would much rather see something go to series than a feature film, because you've got such a broad palette and time to really let the story develop and build.
Me too. I totally agree, and I felt that way for years now, having seen some series that are done right, that actually stick to the books, tell the story, roll the story out in a logical way, and not have every single episode be a conclusion. And David Kelley has adapted some terrific novels for TV, like Big Little Lies and Mr. Mercedes and others. He's doing The Lincoln Lawyer with Michael Connelly right now, and he seems to really appreciate novels and novelists. And that my work with them, in conversations with him, is he just really gets it. So I'm quite excited to see what happens.
I can't wait. I can't wait. So, well, let's get on to back to Joe Pickett, but I just had to kind of geek out about that with you for a minute. I'm always excited to see what you come up with, to put Joe Pickett in, and I'm really interested in what kind of sparks these ideas for him. When the book opens, he is in the middle of investigating a bear attack. What sparked that for you?
Well, an actual incident. I try not to do too much, rip from the headlines kind of things, but sometimes news stories happen, things that happen that I just can't not include in the books and find out more about. And 2 years ago, there was an incident in Wyoming, near the Tetons, where a local hunting guide was guiding a client. They were bow hunters. He was a bow hunter, and they were going after elk. And they were in the Teton Wilderness, and 2 grizzly bears attacked them unprovoked, and just charged out of the trees and attacked these 2, killed the guide, mauled him. The client was able to run away and escape. But the investigators on the scene the next day said it was something that they'd never quite encountered before, because not only were the bears unprovoked, they seemed to have not done it to eat, simply to kill, because the body was still there undisturbed, and as well as a dead elk that they hadn't fed on. So it was a really unusual situation and pretty scary. The investigators found the 2 bears and killed them. And when they did autopsies, they tried to figure out what could have provoked these bears to do this, and didn't really come up with a conclusion that they were satisfied with. So when things like that happen, it puts everybody on edge, and I couldn't not write about it.
Well, if you've ever been in the presence of a grizzly bear, there's very few creatures on this earth that are that intimidating and that powerful. And then to think that they just go rogue is pretty frightening.
It is. And usually when there's some kind of, they call it, a human bear encounter, they can kind of figure out why it happened. Somebody might have walked between a mother bear and her cubs, or, walked up on a bear when it was feeding, some kind of thing. You can say, I see whether that happened. But in this case, the other thing is, there's a theory that, gunshots now are almost like dinner bells for grizzlies. So hunters, the grizzly bear moves in on the kill. But in this case, they were archery hunters, so they weren't making any sound. And there's really no explanation for it.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, Joe gets kind of pulled off of that case to help to investigate another attempted murder. And tell us about the judge and how his story comes in.
Sure. That's how the book opens, so it's not a spoiler by any means. But the first chapter, very short chapter, is told from the point of view of a bullet, a rifle bullet, as it comes out of the muzzle of a high-tech long-range rifle. And we follow the bullet as it goes over a river and over hayfields and fishermen, and gets closer to kind of a golf course community, and hones in on a house, and then a picture window, and then a guy, the judge, eating dinner at his table, and he drops a fork and leans over to get it as the bullet enters the window and hits his wife. So Joe is pulled off the grizzly bear case to help with the investigation of, who could have done this kind of long shot, and who are the suspects. And the judge is not very well liked and has a lot of people who said they'd like to see him go down. So the suspect list and pool is huge. And Joe has to investigate a lot of the people he put in prison in previous books who didn't like the judge and don't like the judge, and try to figure out who could have done it.
It's so wild. And the the way that you tell that from the perspective of the bullet, what tell me a little bit about why you chose to do that, because it's really inventive, and we don't get to see that kind of perspective very often.
Well, I did it because it's you want to, as a writer, you want to show, not tell, and it would not have the impact, I don't think, for a reader to say, a gunshot was fired and 1,200 yards away, it went through a window. But when it's told from the time perspective, 1 second, 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, and what the bullet's passing over and how it's dropping and kind of drifting to hit its target, I think that explains long range shooting better than any kind of technical long treatise on the guns and the ammunition and the optics that are now used, to actually, to just visually see how it happens. Because that's the thing, that's long range shooting has become a big deal in the West, and with a lot of both competition shooters and big game hunters. And anybody with the money now can be, has the capability of doing what only military snipers could do a few years ago, and that is accurately hit a target at over 1,000 yards, 1,200 yards away. And I know this to be a fact because in the research for the book, I went to a manufacturer called Gunworks in Cody, Wyoming, and they manufacture these guns and optics. And I was hitting targets at over 1,000 yards that I couldn't see with my naked eye because they're so sophisticated. And the optics now are little computers in themselves that actually account for the curvature of the earth on a shot that long.
Yeah, and 1,000 yards is a little over half a mile, isn't it?
Right. Yep. 10 football fields.
Yeah, that's insane. That is insane. I have deer hunted most of my life, and if you take a deer at 100 yards or so, that's a good shot. And but 1,000 yards, that's not even sporting anymore,
Well, and that's part of the thing that I get interested in and trying to wrap my mind around is how that has kind of changed the ethics of a big game hunting, or potentially could. There's good things about it. There's bad things about it. I kind of went into a little prejudice saying to the manufacturers, this is. What if you use this rifle and, hit an unsuspecting target 1,000 yards away? Is that really hunting? Is that really sport? And they made the point to me that more and more guides and outfitters have these guns so that if a client happens to wound an animal at a distance, so that animal doesn't suffer and get away, the guide can come in and dispatch it from distance. So I thought, I've never thought of that aspect of it. So.
Right. Joe is also joined by his friend Nate Romanowski, who's appeared in half a dozen or more of your books, if I remember right. Is his closest friend, but he has kind of a checkered past. Tell me about bringing Nate into this story and where he fits in.
Well, Nate's been in quite a few of the books. I think there's only 2 that he hasn't been. And he is an outlaw falconer with a special forces background who has a real code of his own and quite a force of nature in himself. He does a lot of things Joe Pickett would never dream of doing. And it carries the largest handgun in the world and is good with it. The difference here is that he's developed as well and changed over the time. In that, in the first few books, Joe Pickett was raising his very young family at home, and Nate was out roaming around off the grid. And now Joe's an empty nester with his wife, Mary Beth, and Nate has a new family, a new little baby, and he's married. And even though there's a hitman from a Sinaloan cartel coming after him, he not only has to worry about that, he has to worry about what kind of Pampers to buy at the store. So everything's reversed and changed.
It's so fun, so fun. Joe starts to kind of put together a theory that this was a long-range sniper, but people are not willing to accept that, and probably because it is such kind of a new phenomenon, like you talked about, that this technology is becoming available to whomever has the money for it. But it's a fairly new thing. Tell me a little bit about, having Joe unravel this and what this means. What does he think it means for, his place in the world, and what this is going to mean for the way life is going to change because of this?
Well, it's kind of terrifying, and there are several scenes in the book that are terrifying in that way that, the bullet can actually strike long before the gunshot can be heard. So he finds himself in a situation at one point where, the bullets are smacking around him and hitting people, and he has no idea what direction or how far, and that's a pretty hard thing to combat against. But he's and Joe's theory on the case with the long range shot is countermanded by the new local sheriff, who doesn't quite grasp the capability and disagrees with Joe, and they go off on the investigation goes a completely wrong-headed direction because they don't understand the technology and the thought behind the whole incident.
But what is a life seeker box?
It is again, here we've got lots of high-tech stuff. It's a new device that enables search and rescue teams, aerial search and rescue, helicopters, planes, to locate lost hunters or hikers or campers or injured people in the wilderness by tracking their phone signals. So as long as someone's cell phone is on, a life seeker can find them, locate them. If their cell phone is off, they can't. And it also can be used when there's no actual cell service. It just can hone in on the phone itself. So it's being used now to find people that couldn't be found before. And it also has implications, different implications of finding people who maybe don't want to be found.
Right. Technology has become more and more of a plot device. In this book, we're looking at how these high-powered, long-range rifles are affecting the world. When you're dealing with a place like Wyoming, one of the great things about writing a mystery there is that you don't have all of the up-to-date current technology at your disposal, especially with a game warden. And that helps, the mystery writer, but technology is running, full speed ahead, and like, with the life seeker box. I mean, that's crazy. I didn't know that was a thing. How does technology affect Joe Pickett, and how does it affect you writing these stories?
Well, there's some advantages, of course, because I do want to keep current. I don't want to pretend that all these things don't exist. But unlike an urban environment, in mystery writing or thriller writing, or where everybody has their cell phones, everybody can be tracked, there still are huge swaths of territory in the Mountain West, including where I live, where you can't even get a cell signal. So you're in and out of that. The technology is in and out of the story. When I first started writing about Joe Pickett, cell phones didn't exist even. But he's now adopted it, and they use it. But you can't count on it to solve the mysteries, because there's places where it doesn't even exist yet, and may not for an awful long time. So Joe takes that into account, but that's always a problem. Connecting with his wife, having to get to a certain point up on the mountain and are able to get a signal, that kind of thing. So it complicates things.
Yeah, for sure. The judge who is shot at, and then his wife is, ultimately shot. Judge Hewitt is, kind of, referred to as a hanging judge. These kind of, uber, justice seekers, and which becomes interesting when he needs justice himself. And you start, seeing someone who's made a lot of enemies, and people don't feel very, don't have a lot of compassion for. How fun was that as a writer to kind of explore the ideas of, law enforcement and doing the job no matter what, and how these different aspects and these characters affect the community around them?
Well, it was a lot of fun with that character, because when the judge is in his courtroom, he is the dictator. He has a sidearm under his robes. He treats lawyers badly if he thinks they're incompetent. He's sentenced a lot of people. He has ultimate power. But when somebody's actually trying to kill him, he feels very vulnerable because he doesn't know where it's coming from. He doesn't know where it's going to happen next. He starts thinking of all the people who probably want him gone. And he becomes very kind of sympathetic, kind of almost pathetic character for a while. And then he doesn't know where to turn. He's used to just making an order and people march. And all of a sudden he's in this situation where they can't solve the crime and he doesn't know what to do next.
Oh, man, that's such a crazy thing to think about. When the one thing that I love about your books is Wyoming is a character in the books. What is it that's so special about this land and this place that make these stories come alive?
Well, I think it's a large combination of things. One is that it's a huge state. It's the size of France, and there's only 600,000 people in it. Also, a big contributing factor is the Western history that's associated with it. Almost all the outlaw stories, the Johnson County Range War, all those kind of super extreme things that are all kind of part of our history all happened here. But it's also half owned by the federal government, which means 50% of the state is public lands, meaning a lot of federal agencies run it, federal bureaucrats, unelected, are involved, lots of different law enforcement entities because of all that federal land plus Indian reservations. It's very complicated, and it's kind of on a lot of cutting edge environmental, resource-based, energy-based things start here, even though it's a small population. So it's a very rich environment for stories and aspects of things that you wouldn't maybe normally think about. And because it's so big, but everybody seems, I've written about it before, there's still one degree of separation in Wyoming among residents. You may not know somebody who lives in Cody, but you know somebody who knows that person. And you can connect very quickly. So there's kind of a community, in a sense, that maybe doesn't exist in a lot of places.
Well, Long Range, the new Joe Pickett novel, the 20th Joe Pickett novel, is available everywhere now. There's links to it in the show notes. CJ, knowing you, this book is out available now, so you're probably just about ready to turn in a new book. What are you working on now?
I'm working on the 21st Joe Pickett novel. It's about 2/3 done, and it'll actually be done very, very soon. Probably be out next March is my guess. And then after that, I'm going to start working on the next Cassie Duell book.
Nice. And of course, we can't forget this fall, Cassie Duell comes to TV on ABC, and so looking forward to that. CJ, tell people where they can find you online to dig into all the great stuff that you do.
Easiest place is cjbox.net. It's got the links to buy the books and information on all them, interviews, all sorts of things. So cjbox.net.
Excellent. CJ, it's always fun catching up, and it's always fun reading a new Joe Pickett novel. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Well, thank you very much. This is fun.
Stay tuned now for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Umbra War.
The near future. The probe slowed as the sun's heliosphere disrupted the graviton wave it rode in on from the abyss of deep space. Awakened by the sudden deceleration, the probe absorbed the electromagnetic spectrum utilized by its target species and assessed the technological sophistication of the sole sentient species on Earth. The probe adjusted its course to take it into the system's primary. If the humans couldn't survive, with its help, what was to come? Then the probe would annihilate itself. there would be no trace of it for the enemy, and no chance of humanity's existence beyond the time it had until the enemy arrived. The probe analyzed filed patents, military expenditures, birth rates, mathematical advancement, and space exploration. The first assessment fell within the margin of error of survival and extinction for humanity. The probe's programming allowed for limited, autonomous decision-making, choice being a rare luxury for the probe's class of artificial intelligence. The probe found itself in a position to choose between ending its mission in the sun's fire and a mathematically improbable defense of humanity, and the potential compromise of its much larger mission. Given the rare opportunity to make its own decision, the probe opted to dither. In the week it took to pass into Jupiter's orbit, the probe took in more data. It scoured the internet for factors to add to the assessment, but the assessment remained the same. Unlikely, but possible. By the time it shot past Mars, the probe still hadn't made a decision. As the time to adjust course for Earth or continue into the Sun approached, the probe conducted a final scan of cloud storage servers for any new information, and found something interesting. While the new information made only a negligible impact on the assessment, the probe adjusted course to Earth. It hadn't traveled all this way for nothing. In the desert south of Phoenix, Arizona, it landed with no more fanfare than a slight thump and a few startled cows. Then it broke into the local cell network and made a call. Mark Ibarra awoke to his phone ringing at max volume, playing a pop ditty that he hated with vehemence. He rolled off the mattress that lay on the floor and crawled on his hands and knees to where his cell was recharging. His roommate, who paid the majority of their rent and got to sleep on an actual bed, grumbled and let off a slew of slurred insults. Mark reached his cell and slapped at it until the offending music ended. He blinked sleep from his eyes and tried to focus on the caller's name on the screen. The only people who'd call at this ungodly hour were his family in Basque country, or maybe Jessica in his applied robotics course wanted a late-night study break. The name on the screen was Answer Me. He closed an eye and reread the name. It was way too early, or too late, depending on one's point of view, for this nonsense. He turned the ringer off and went back to bed. Sleep was about to claim him when the phone rang again, just as loudly as last time, but now with a disco anthem. "Seriously?" his roommate slurred. Mark declined the call and powered the phone off. He flopped back on his bed and curled into his blanket. To hell with my first class, he thought. Arizona State University had a lax attendance policy, one which he'd abused for nights like this. The cell erupted with big band music. Mark took his head out from beneath the covers and looked at his phone like it was a thing possessed. The phone vibrated so hard that it practically danced a jig on the floor, and the screen flashed Answer Me over and over again as music blared. "Dude," said his roommate, now sitting up in his bed. Mark swiped the phone off the charging cord, and the music stopped. The caller's name undulated with a rainbow of colors, and an arrow appeared on the screen, pointing to the button he had to press to answer the call. When did I get this app? He thought. Mark sighed and left the bedroom, meandering into the hallway bathroom with the grace of a zombie. The battered mattress he slept on played hell with his back and left him stiff every morning. Dropping his boxers, he took a seat on the toilet and answered the call, determined to return this caller's civility with some interesting background noise. "What?" he murmured. "Mark Ibarra. I need to see you." The voice was mechanical, asexual in its monotone. "Do you have any friggin' idea what time it is? Wait, who the hell is this?" "You must come to me immediately. We must discuss the mathematical proof you have stored in document title This Can't Be Right. Doc." Mark shot to his feet. The boxers around his ankles tripped him up, and he stumbled out of the bathroom and fell against the wall. His elbow punched a hole in the drywall, and the cell clattered to the floor. He scooped the phone back up and struggled to breathe as a sudden asthma attack came over him. How? He couldn't finish his question until he found his inhaler in the kitchen, mere steps away in the tiny apartment. He took a deep breath from the inhaler and felt the tightness leave his lungs. That someone knew of his proof was impossible. He'd finished it earlier that night and had encrypted it several times before loading it into a cloud file that shouldn't have been linked to him in any way. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "You must come to me immediately. There is little time. Look at your screen," the robotic voice said. His screen changed to a map program, displaying a pin in an open field just off the highway, connecting Phoenix to the suburb of Maricopa. "Come. Now." Mark grabbed his keys. An hour later, his jeans ripped from scaling a barbed wire fence, Mark was surrounded by desert scrub. The blue of the morning rose behind him, where his beat-up Honda waited on the side of the highway. With his cell to its...
Some things you write now, do they differ in the writing process from
plants? Looked a lot like benign mesquite trees in the darkness. A Native American casino in the distance served as his North Star, helping him keep his bearings. "You're not out here, are you? I'm being punked, aren't I?" he asked the mysterious caller. "You are 9.26 meters to my east-southeast. Punk, decayed wood, used as tinder. Are you on fire?" the caller said. Mark rolled his eyes. This wasn't the first time the caller had used the non-standard meanings of words during what passed as conversation between the two. Mark had tried to get the caller to explain how he knew about his theorem and why they had to meet in the middle of the desert. The caller had refused to say anything. He would only reiterate that Mark had to come quickly to see him, chiding him every time Mark deviated from the provided driving directions. "If you're so close, why can't I see you?" he asked. He took a few steps in what he thought was a northwesterly direction and squished into a cow patty.